Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and RedBridge's Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Good morning. Welcome back, Curtinistas, to Curtin's Cast. I'm Nick Dyrenfurth, Head Honcho, Executive Director of the John Curtin Research Centre, joined once again by my co-host, Cosmos Kung Fu, Samaras, Director of RedBridge Polling. G'day, Cosy. How are you this fine, warm autumn Melbourne morning?
Yeah, it's staying a bit warm for far too long, in my opinion. I'm looking forward to the winter.
It's called climate change, Cos.
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it.
It's the first week of May, obviously. 1 year on from the 2025 federal election and almost 4 years on from the 2022 election, which brought Albanese Labor to power. Where did those 4 years go, guys? And the political mood keeps shifting. It keeps shifting and shape-shifting. According to the latest AFR RedBridge accent poll, which Cos is in charge of, Albo is back in the game, kind of. After many months of drift, sharp collapse in confidence following the Bondi massacre late last year, the PM's personal standing has staged somewhat of a recovery. The trigger, at least according to the AFR's coverage, is his government's handling of the fuel price crisis. Albo's net approval has jumped 8 points in a month from minus 17 to minus 9. Now, that's clearly in negative territory. I think Pauline Hanson is slightly in positive territory. But the direction matters, or at least we'll be asking Cosy if the direction matters. And at the same time, we can still see that the right is fragmented and is fragmenting rather than consolidating. One nation seems to have stalled. I made a prediction, Cosy, at the beginning of this year that One Nation would peak and then plateau, and I think we're starting to see evidence of that. We're seeing that there is a ceiling. So we're very fortunate to have you with us, Australia's leading pollster, to break down the numbers, tell us what voters are really saying in this latest AFR RedBridge accent poll. What are they saying? Yeah. What can we take from this poll, which shows One Nation, again, clearly the second most popular political party, well ahead of the coalition?
Yeah, that's right. Really, for Labor, nothing much has changed.
Yeah.
Yes, Labor's polling position was great after the last federal election, but that was a manifestation of a sort of, I would say, lukewarm honeymoon period. The primary vote now is where it was just before the federal election. It's roughly around the same numbers we saw on election night. It's in the low 30s. It's basically the Labor base. And what's important to note about the Labor base is that it is very anti-One Nation. So this goes to the point that you just made about their ceiling, as in One Nation's ceiling. When we ask respondents about how they rate a particular political leader, amongst that 31%, Hanson is well over 50% in negative territory. As unpopular as Trump. So the likelihood of One Nation eating further into that Labor base is extremely remote. However, the warning signs for the coalition are still there. A significant portion of coalition voters still rate Pauline Hanson favourably. So therefore, I would argue that to a certain extent there is still some room for growth for One Nation at the expense of the coalition. So we may have not seen the ceiling yet. It has plateaued, and we could see that. The question is, will One Nation harvest more support at the expense of the coalition? And how long will that take? Now, the flip side to that is I do think that Pauline Hanson has made some strategic errors. The first strategic error is her want to basically attach herself to Donald Trump.
Yeah. We can call this the Trump dump.
Yeah,
There's
that's
a new
right.
term.
There is a portion of the Liberal vote and base that has a very, very negative view of the US president and anyone that associates themselves with them. So I think that to a certain extent may actually limit a further pillaging of the coalition primary. But we'll have to wait and see.
Just on that, and we are going to deep dive into the Nepean by-election, the upcoming Farrer by-election. We're also going to talk about your brilliant Substack on the Indian diaspora and the Liberals base. But just I want just sticking with Trump for the moment. I think the headline statistic in your data point in your poll was across Australians was Trump's approval rating, whatever that means, was -57, -58%. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, correct.
So any association with Trump and MAGA politics is toxic.
Yes, absolutely, and especially in today's environment, when Australians go to the Bowser and are paying significant amounts of money just to fuel their car up, they are blaming one person and one person only, and it's the US president. No matter how hard some, I would say, in politics, try to weaponise this fuel crisis at a local domestic level, overwhelmingly Australians are switched on. They know what's going on globally. They see what has contributed to this fuel shock, and they're blaming one person. That coupled with all the other antics, like putting 100% tariffs on Australian pharmaceuticals, like accusing Australian soldiers for serving on the front line, and the list is very long, and I suspect will be added to within the months to come.
Yeah, and Australians aren't alone there, cause actually, this Trump dump, the anti-Trump sentiment. There's actually a great. I read a great article in The Economist today. Shows that even young men in the States, they're not stupid, mate. They can, when they're filling up their car with petrol, they can see they can read the price. You know, we know that 49% of men aged 18 to 29 voted for Trump at the last election. They're turning against him in the States too.
Yeah, that podcast ecosystem that was incredibly important for the Trump campaign has basically turned on the US president, and so I think that's obviously having an impact as well.
Just sticking with this, I had a piece in The Australian yesterday, and it's not just the association with Trump, I wonder whether, which is contributing to the Hanson ceiling. It's also now the very well publicised and self-publicised connections with Gina Rinehart, Australia's wealthiest individual, a billionaire, who in the lead up to the Nepean by-election gifted Pauline Hanson her own private plane, and Hanson boasted about it. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Cosy, but I would have thought that association really exposes the contradiction at the heart of one nation. You've got a populist party and a populist leader raging against elites and the establishment, but on the other hand, are taking money and funding and possibly direction, at least you can infer direction, from the biggest economic elite in this country, and someone who has diametrically opposed views to ordinary Australians on bread and butter issues like work-based relations. Like Gina Rinehart, not all of us have the memory of Goldfish. This is the woman who was out there sort of admiringly talking about how Africans were keen to work for $2 a day in the mining sector, and counterposing that with the Australian example.
Yeah, I'm not sure how significant that will be in impacting the One Nation vote. We're not seeing any evidence of that. It'll take a bit before, I would say, those who have moved to One Nation over the last 6 months have second thoughts.
Yeah.
We're not seeing any buyer's remorse at the moment.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, Rinehart's associate attached herself to the whole Trump MAGA project as well.
Yes, that's right.
Was
Correct,
obviously
yes.
partying it up on election night
Yeah.
at Mar-a-Lago. And as you pointed out, you know, the whiff of any association with Mar-a-Lago is
right.
poisonous in Australian politics.
I would liken it to as political poison gas.
As you and other pollsters always point out, the trend is your friend or the trend isn't your friend. So let's watch that very closely over the next 2, 3, 6 months to see whether the ceiling has been established. Turning more specifically to the weekend's Victorian state by-election, which probably got more attention because of the absence of a Labor candidate, the One Nation surge nationally than a regular Victorian state by-election would have, and also the fact that Victorians are going to the polls in late November this year. Might be worth, before we sort of deep dive into what actually happened, how do we interpret the numbers, why don't you tell listeners about the seat of Nepean, because it's a bit of a schizophrenic seat, isn't it?
That's right. It's right on the end of the peninsula, as us Melburnians would like to define it. It is an electorate where 75% of its population live within 2 kilometres of the beach. Doesn't mean it's a Gold Coast resort. It can get pretty cold during the winter. There's no doubt about that, but it's a lovely place during the summer. It's got some of the highest number of residents who have significant asset wealth. It's a ageing electorate in a very significant way. It has very small pockets of working class constituencies that are feeling financial pressure. But it is absolutely the type of seat that about 8 weeks ago, when I participated in an interview with Channel 7 and I was asked a question, what are the prospects of One Nation in the state seat of Nepean? My response is it is not an electorate which I would define as natural territory for them. And I think the result on the weekend effectively obviously supports that, and it shouldn't surprise anyone. I mean, the one thing that we did see on the weekend is that there was a swing against the Liberal Party to the tune of about 10%.
Yeah, just under.
Which is on par with what we're seeing across the state of Victoria, and that is a swing against the coalition to the tune of 10%, and most of that going to One Nation.
Yes, they ended up, I checked the Victorian Electoral Commission website this morning, Libs on a primary of 38%, One Nation second just shy of 25%, and the independent, Tracy Hutchison, whether you want to call her a teal, she's a former journalist, quite clearly progressive, left-wing. She would have soaked up quite a bit of the left-wing vote there as well. But I'm not the only person to pick this up, because there was the Libs, One Nation, amongst the more affluent sort of coastal booths did poorly, but there were some very interesting results in booths like Rosebud,
That's right.
where they picked up 40% of the primary vote. And that, for me, would ring alarm bells for Victorian Labor, because Rosebud looks a lot like a lot of the outer suburban metropolitan seats which are at play at the November election.
Should ring alarm bells for both major parties.
Yes, correct.
Right? So Rosebud has a lot of working class conservatives in it, for example.
Yep.
Yes, it has Labor voters amongst it as well. It is very hard to determine as to whether Labor voters tactically voted for One Nation at this election, this by-election, or actually voted on purpose, because that's what they're going to do in November. We know through statewide polling and other deep dives that we've conducted that, look, the One Nation vote is largely coming off the coalition. There is a portion of that also coming from the Labor camp. The vulnerability for Labor is, as you and I, Nick, have spoken about over several now episodes, and that is it is largely in the outer suburbs. But Rosebud is, and that type of community is very prolific in seats like Hastings, Bass and Pakenham. These are electorates that are held by wafer-thin margins by Labor at the moment, probably were seats they should not have won in 2022 and paid a price for winning them, because They basically pivoted heavily into those electorates at the expense of seats that are now vulnerable to One Nation in Melbourne's west. So strategically, not the smartest moves. Yes, got them the result they needed, but it was a very shallow win. I think separating a lot of these seats is only about 20,000 votes across 20-odd seats. So, yeah, we're going to have a situation now where both major parties are going to be defending themselves against One Nation whilst trying to pick up seats off each other. Mainly, obviously, the coalition is to pick seats up of Labor. And the point I always now make is, did the result on the weekend give anyone confidence that the Liberal Party can win 16 seats and record a swing greater than the one that Kennett secured in 1992 and that Brack secured in his Brack slide in 2002? Great. So the swing has to be about 8% to win 16 seats because the buffers are so big in some of these seats. The answer is, I think, no.
9-0. Zip. Nada.
Yeah.
Zilch, as the Seinfeld line goes. But at the point you've made, and it's really people, it's worth impressing on people again, this idea that we're going to see kind of 89 by-elections. It makes campaigning extraordinarily difficult. It makes allocation of resources, funding, campaigners, on the ground people, extremely tricky for the major parties.
That's right. And I would say it makes polling extremely difficult.
Yes.
The one thing that I'll point out here is it was very clear to me and others that the Liberal Party were briefing out in the last week leading up to the weekend that they thought they were in trouble in Nepean. That tells me their polling has got methodological problems, which doesn't surprise me because they've historically have struggled with their pollsters.
They're still not using the old freshwater.
Well, I'm not going to name pollsters, but I would say that they're using a different polling outfit now, and I wouldn't say that polling outfit's not capable of really good work. It's just that it is extremely challenging polling individual state seats and individual federal seats. And the methodology available to pollsters these days is cumbersome, and it can be highly inaccurate. And so it's going to be a challenge for both major parties. They will be conducting an election campaign based on some of this polling, which in many cases, the polling will be wrong. And you can normally get away with that when you've got a traditional two-horse race. But when, as you touched on, Nick, before, you have 88 seats at play and you have a whole bunch of three-way and four-way contests, you're going to be allocating resources to seats that probably didn't deserve it, and seats that probably needed those resources didn't get them. And I think that particularly with both major parties and the National Party, they'll find themselves in that predicament in more ways than one.
Now, before we leave Nepean and shift our attention to Farrer by-election in regional New South Wales, again, most of the commentary has been on Labor, Liberal and One Nation. One party which struck me, their vote was depressed, was the Greens. They polled less than 10%. Now, again, let's remember, Labor did not run a candidate. I'd be interested actually in your opinion because of what the result would have looked like had Labor run a candidate. It seems to me that the independent Tracy Hutchison, the left-wing independent, has scooped up a lot of that kind of the middle-class professional knowledge class base of Labor in that seat, and it's less in that seat than other parts of metropolitan Melbourne. The Greens ordinarily would mop that up, but they haven't here. Like 9% at a by-election seems to me to be a dreadful result. And if people have voted tactically, I guess some voters may have voted for the independent. Some Labor voters might have gone, well, we just want to keep One Nation out, so we're not wasting our time with the Greens. We actually might vote Liberal tactically here just to keep Hansonism out of Nepean.
If Labor had run, I would say Labor would have recorded a swing against it as well. Mm-hmm. So the story would be both major parties copped a swing against them. And again, the pattern will be similar to what we're seeing statewide. So less of a swing, but still, it still will be there. With regards to the Greens, yes, I think you're correct. And we will probably see again in November a situation where progressive voters will coalesce around Labor to stop One Nation. The noise that will permeate through the entire political ecosystem of the state of Victoria come November will be how many seats will One Nation win, and will they provide supply to a Jess Wilson government? And that will motivate the left side of politics in a very big way, and the Greens will effectively remain irrelevant to the conversation. And I think the Nepean by-election kind of proves that, but I think we've seen this play out in other environments as well. Yeah, I think the Greens have got their hands full come next election.
Yes, and perhaps lacking the ability, the introspection to actually understand and comprehend why their brand is on the nose, or at least why enough of the left bloc that we've been discussing in depth on this pod is betting the house on Labor if voting within the left bloc. Cozzy, moving to New South Wales. So this weekend we've got a by-election in Farrer, which has come about because of the resignation of former Liberal leader Susan Ley from Parliament. Tell us, again, we can't assume that everyone is following politics to the same extent as the two of us. What's going on in Farrer? What's the major contest? Who wins and why?
Yeah, the City of Farrer is your classic regional Australian electorate. It has a number of large provincial centres, and it's accompanied by many small towns. It's an electorate that is atypical of what the coalition currently holds, be it the National Party, the LNP, or the Liberal Party. And really the last, I would say, bits of political real estate that they can call home once, because of them being pushed out so significantly out of the big urban centres of this country. So at the moment, based on what we've seen, One Nation and the Independent look like finishing first and second. One Nation still has a challenge on its hands because it needs to finish with a very significant primary vote. It has to finish first.
What, at about 40%?
Well, the higher the better.
Yeah.
Because the Independent might, through Liberal Party preferences, jump them during the count. Now that's not a strong possibility.
Which is the Liberals' preference, is that the Independent
That's right.
gets up at a
The Liberals
by-election.
are handing out a how to vote card that's preferencing One Nation. That's fine, but most voters really don't follow how to vote cards, contrary to popular belief. When you get handed that bit of paper when you go to vote, the vast majority of us Australians actually don't follow it. We follow our own, views and political objectives.
I hope you follow the Labor how to vote card, Cosy.
No, I actually don't sometimes.
No, I don't sometimes either.
Yeah, right. No. I will pick and choose. Certain things get put last, and will not surprise you who I put last. I'll be very different to you though, because the Greens for me will be much higher.
Yes. Electors in McNamara, because Labor electors in McNamara were offered up a slightly different offer than the how to vote card at the last election for obvious reasons. So if the Libs lose Farrer, is that a catastrophe for the party?
Well, it's a continuation of that story that we've now been all observing, and that is that the centre-right of politics in this country is going for a significant restructure. The Liberal Party, or the coalition, is being relegated to third in terms of the party system. One Nation winning a seat like this will be a significant blow to them, because it is a significant beachhead that One Nation can establish in that part of Australia. Barnaby Joyce has just recently said that he's not ruled out running in his seat of New England. Now, based on analysis that I've done across the country in terms of which demographies are very, very, very friendly to One Nation, absolute New England is that, but also Farrer is as well.
It's the symbolism, the symbolism. It would mean another seat that was previously occupied by a coalition leader is no longer in coalition hands. So you go back through the leaders over the past few decades. Ben Long is Labor.
Warringah, Wentworth,
Dixon.
you can name them all.
And the deputy leaders as well, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, North Sydney, which has now since been abolished, which was, obviously another seat that was once upon a time. These sort of seats that we're talking about were seats that leaders occupied. Menzies in Victoria, Higgins, that's since been abolished. Peter Costello's former electorate was won by Labor, and now we're going into the regional arena, and this is where they start to lose political real estate that their leaders occupy now. They're in a really wicked political vice, and that is they are going to continue to be pressured by One Nation in the regions. They're going to continuously find it very difficult managing the politics of big urban Australia. They're going to try to, at first, address their most immediate threat, which is One Nation in regional Australia. And by doing that, they're going to further ostracise their position in big urban Australia. So they're in a wicked place, and I don't know what their solution is, and it will take. There might not be one, right? We don't know.
Exactly, Cozzy. I love your work. You're doing my job for me. You're just segueing into our final segment of this pod, which is talking about your fantastic Substack. Curtinisters, if you haven't already checked out RedBridge's Substack, get over there, subscribe, give it a like. Cos, his latest Substack, do they call it subbies? I don't know.
Subbies,
I don't even put one up, mate. It's called a decade of dog whistles and a decade of lost voters. And it's a nice segue because it actually gets to the structural and demographic problems that the Liberal Party faces in chasing Pauline but losing the future. And I was really struck by the way you opened up the Substack, Cos. You look at the archetypal voter, possibly of Indian Australian diaspora background, and you might want to talk to the data and statistics about migration, which came out last week, and the previous traditional archetypal liberal, aspirational, small C conservative voter, small business owner, has a mortgage, sending the kids to not an elite private school, but a modest private school, maybe a small low-fee Catholic school, small C socially conservative. They should be liberal by instinct. They're most likely to be, if we're generalising, to be Indian Australian households. This should be core liberal territory. But the Liberals are losing votes and losing the voters it was built to represent, and they don't seem to understand the problem. Well, I know there are people like Tony Barry, your offside, who get this, but anyway, brilliant Substack. Walk us through it in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so it's a treatment I use when I am trying to describe the predicament the Liberal Party's in, and I start talking about a atypical profile. And I list those characteristics, which is, let me paint a picture of a particular group of voters. They are socially conservative. They prefer to run a small business. They are incredibly aspirational. They would like to own a home outright. They aspire to have children. They would like to send their kids to private school. They take out private health insurance not by necessity but by choice. And as I touched on, they are religious. Now, that constituency, if you were talking to a Liberal Party strategist in 1996, that strategist will turn around to you and say, well, they're our voters. No, they are Indian Australians. And like Chinese Australians, who are very similar in their characteristics, they are overwhelmingly not voting for the Liberal Party. And it's because of, I would argue, years of dog whistling, even Angus Taylor's recent immigration stunt, where he basically categorised the countries they come from as bad countries on insiders. That's just absolutely disastrous for them. Because these,
including Iran, my friends in the Iranian Australian diaspora were were outraged. Like, kind
Yeah,
of not being able
correct.
to distinguish
Yeah.
between the theocrats running the show there and ordinary decent Iranians who just want to get on with their lives.
It all boils down to where do these politicians come from and which communities have they grown up in? Because they think there's an immigration problem because someone's told them that. Those of us who live in Melbourne and Sydney will tell us, yeah, there's probably too much coming in at the moment, right? Our infrastructure is, buckling under the strain.
Yeah.
But they're really the only constituencies where you would say you have a legitimate gripe to make a point that our influx is probably a bit too high at the moment. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have an influx, but if you're living in Queensland, if you're living in Western Australia, you look at those the statistics that the ABS released last week. The most dominant constituency are outside Australians who were born here, are Australians who were born in England.
Yes, number two.
And then South Africa, and then New Zealand, and of course,
but India, we should say, India has overtaken every other country.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Yeah,
I was going to get to that. So, but when we come to Sydney and Melbourne, this is where the big changes have occurred, and why now you cannot live in the lodge as Prime Minister unless you're winning Melbourne and Sydney, and you cannot win Melbourne and Sydney without the Indian and Chinese diasporas. Full stop. And of course, as you just touched on, the Indian community now is the largest diaspora in the country. It's overwhelmingly, by a country mile, the largest in Victoria. And combined Chinese and Indian and Australians in New South Wales are absolutely kazump, those from England. And again, these are important contrasts because if you're aligning yourself up with the constituencies of those who either were born in the UK and they've migrated here, and you've decided on a political strategy that is not going to be focused to these other cohorts that we've been talking about, you're going to run out of tarmac. The median age of someone who was born in the UK and lives here is 59. Yeah. The median age of someone who was born in India and lives here is 36. So you have one cohort that's growing and starting families, starting businesses, becoming the new Australia, and will shape the political landscape for years to come. And another one that's actually phasing out. Again, the story of the Liberal Party.
But these people haven't changed, Cos. So just anecdotally, one of my oldest friends was born here but Indian back. His parents migrated from India, Sikhs, okay? Small business owners. Ran one of Melbourne's most well-known Indian restaurants. Not radicals, religious, Sikhs, not reactionaries either, aspirational, sent the kids to private schools. They haven't changed.
No.
What's changed is the population's become younger, but they haven't changed. It's like Liberal Party have not kept up with. It's the Liberal Party who have changed.
Yeah, and they're pitching to an Australia that doesn't exist anymore. Or more to the point, to my earlier frame, and that is that they are pitching to an Australia that exists, all right. It just doesn't live in the electoral constituencies which determine federal elections.
Yeah. So where do they live, Cos? So this is the whole. So there are electoral consequences. This is not just us being Labor partisans.
Nope.
Like no. They're clustered in seats like Chisholm, Deakin, Aston, as far as I know. New South Wales, Bennelong, Reid, Parramatta, Melbourne, Sydney. These are the seats where that diaspora influx, and it's also happening in Queensland too. Cause again, I've got Indian Australian friends out there in Ipswich and surrounds. This is where elections are won.
Yeah, that's right. And
it's
so there's
not just
that going on.
They have lost an understanding of who its archetypal voter, its base is.
Yeah, we'll go back to the point, and that is that they are animated by an Australia that doesn't exist anymore. And they think that the elections are determined by the sort of constituencies that determine the 2019 election. That was the last time the Labor Party embarked on I would say election strategy that was focused on winning regional electorates. And it was that defeat that sent the Labor Party into a different trajectory, and that is straight into urban settings. and went after seats like Bennelong, John Howard's former seat, seats like Reid. First had a shot at Menzies, failed, then had another shot and won. These are seats that 10, 15 years ago would be unheard of sitting on the Labor side of politics. Again, these seats have been reshaped demographically by the communities that we'll be talking about. Even a seat like Tagney in Perth is been completely recalculated. Yeah, same story. That's right. So this is the new world order that we are operating in. We've just had the ABS release those statistics. I think within the close of this decade, the numbers will be even more overwhelming. No point arguing about immigration now. That train is well and truly run away. Close of this decade in Victoria, we'll probably have close to, I would say, 1 million Chinese and Indian Victorians, just in the state of Victoria, combined, and many of them are enrolled to vote. So if you're not winning their hearts and minds, you're not winning elections, full stop.
Yes, Cozzy, out there in the right-wing social media sphere, they'd love to talk about, they use this meme, go woke, go broke. But politically, go anti-woke is sending the Liberals and the coalitions amongst this diaspora, amongst metropolitan electorates, it's sending them politically broke. Cos, last question before we go, I'm going to put you on the spot. Farah by-election.
It will be between One Nation and
don't hedge your bets there, mate.
Right?
Come on.
Mate, you're talking to followers here. No, I couldn't tell you. And again, we'll go back to that earlier point about seat-based polling. I've seen some seat-based polling. Yeah, okay, it may or may not be accurate, but I would say at this stage, we're just going to have to wait and see. We are living for a transitional period. And no matter how, and to your earlier point around what that right-wing ecosystem does online, which, by the way, I need to make a point here. They don't live in the real world. Anyone who engages in that ecosystem is not a serious person. The serious world is what happens at that ballot box. This is when reality smacks you in the face.
Which I've just decided to coin a new term. Let's call it the dope sphere.
Yeah, well, it's something. It's not real.
Let's leave it there. We will check back into reality next week. Cozzy, we've got an awesome guest from the UK, New Statesman journalist Emily Lawford, who'll be talking about her brilliant New Statesman cover story, "Angry Young Women on the Rise of the Femosphere in Opposition to the Manosphere." And then in a fortnight's time, we'll check back in on Farah. Thank you, Coz. Listeners are very fortunate to have your expertise and wisdom in guiding us through this tumultuous period in Australian and global politics. I'll see you next week, Coz. Listeners, thank you very much for joining us again. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. But for now, it's ciao, arrivederci.